realfaith.org.au.
There's been a huge number of instances of honouring William Cooper in Australia, plus also at Yad Vashem in Israel, where Norman and I were privileged to attend. And there were 17 parliamentarians from Australia from a bipartisan group. And basically, William Cooper was honoured there with a chair of resistance to the Holocaust named after him.
Welcome to Real Faith. Conversations about the impact faith has on our lives and the challenges we go through, helping us today and giving us hope for tomorrow. That's real people, real life, and real faith with Eric Scatterbo.
Our guest today is once again author Barbara Miller. As we heard last time, Barbara has had a keen interest in working for Aboriginal advancement since 1970, and her husband Norman is an Aboriginal Australian. Today, Barbara will share with us the remarkable story of William Cooper, who she says is the closest Australia has to a Martin Luther King figure. William Cooper championed the rights of Indigenous people his entire life. Also, Cooper fought for the rights of people outside of Australia. Most notably, he organized a protest march from his home in Footscray to the German consulate in Melbourne to protest the treatment of Jews at the start of the Holocaust. Today we'll learn about this and a lot more as Barbara Miller shares William Cooper's inspiring story. Once again, Barbara is joining us from her home in Cairns in northern Queensland. Barbara Miller, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Eric. A pleasure to be with you.
So glad to have you with us again. And you've written more than one book about William Cooper, is that right?
I've written 3 books about William Cooper, which probably sounds amazing, but the first one I did, William Cooper, Gentle Warrior, in 2012, and then I felt like it needed to be updated because the family has been following up on his story. And so in 2019, I wrote White Australia Has a Black History, and in 2020, Shattered Lives, Broken Dreams. So when I did the update, I felt there was enough information there for 2 books, one on his work for Aboriginal people and one for his involvement with Jewish people.
Wow. So a whole lot there. What got your interest in his life to begin with? How did you even become inspired to write about him or become interested in him?
Well, it was actually through another book called One Blood by John Harris, who was writing about the history of Aboriginal missions in Australia, which I was quite interested in. And then I came across the name William Cooper and how he had been involved with starting Aboriginal Sunday, which in 1940, in January, which eventually became NAIDOC, or National Aborigines and Islanders Week. And so I thought, well, I've been celebrating that for years. And to find out this is the origin of it, and that William Cooper was a Christian. And so that got my interest straight off. At that stage, I had no plans to write a book about him. But things developed, and I found out later on, I mentioned in my first interview how Norman and I were working on saying sorry to Jewish groups in Australia with regard to Evian, when Australia closed the doors virtually to Jewish refugees, or almost left the door a little bit ajar, which resulted in many lives being lost, unfortunately. And so when Norman and I went to Jeremy Jones, who was in Sydney, who was the head of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, and said sorry, he actually got a photographer to come in and take a photo of us. And we had handed him a certificate with a written apology on it. And that ended up in a Jewish newspaper, which we would not have seen, but a friend of ours in Sydney posted it to us in Cairns. And in that newspaper, there was also an article of how the Holocaust Museum in Melbourne was honouring William Cooper because he led this protest against Kristallnacht at the start of the Holocaust. And I thought, wow, so there's more to that William Cooper story than I thought. So my interest was piqued because he was ticking a number of boxes for me. One, he was a Christian. Secondly, he was an Aboriginal leader who worked, as he called it, the words he used were the uplift of his people. And thirdly, he had a heart for the Jewish people and stood up when they were being killed and sent to concentration camps, etc. So he ticked all the boxes for me.
Well, he's ticking all the boxes for me too. I want to hear his story. Let's find out, where was he born and raised, or let's go before him. Let's find out about his parents as well.
Okay, so his mother was a tribal woman called Kitty, and she is such amazing because, you know, you've got the link with William Cooper right back until white settlement in Australia, because his mother saw the first white settlers come to the Murray River area and start to take land there and bring their sheep, etc. And so his father was an itinerant non-Indigenous person who wasn't very involved in his life, but he was close to his mother, and he made a real effort to try to pray her and talk her into becoming a Christian, which she resisted for quite some time. She wouldn't go to the mission where William was at Maloga as a boy, but she stayed in her little humpy away from the mission. But he eventually she gave her heart to the Lord too.
Oh, okay. Now you mentioned he was at a mission. How did that come about?
Well, there were missionaries called Daniel and Janet Matthews, and they were really concerned because there were some young Aboriginal girls who were becoming pregnant much too young by men who were working in the area and basically just didn't look after them or the babies, and because they didn't want to have babies of colour, I suppose you could say. So basically Daniel and Janet gathered up some of these children and started a mission. And because William's sister was one of the girls that came to the mission, that was how Daniel went out and picked up her brothers and brought them in with Kitty's permission.
Okay, so that's how he got there. Was that a positive experience for William to be there at the mission?
It was very positive for him because he learned to read and write, and later on he was very prolific in letter writing to newspapers and parliamentarians. But the biggest thing was that that's where he became a Christian, and he heard the stories of the Hebrews coming out of slavery in Egypt, and they sang Negro spirituals. And Daniel Matthews was very much for standing up for the rights of Aboriginal people, and imbued that in those who made up the mission. So, yes, even at an early age, Daniel encouraged William Cooper and his brothers to write a petition to try and get their land back so that they could have some land for farming.
Let's find out a little bit more about this missionary couple, Daniel and Janet Matthews. What's their background?
Well, look, it's a very interesting story. Daniel was very much against slavery or maltreatment of people, and one of the reasons for that is because his father was actually captain of a slave trading boat.
Yeah.
This was in the 1830s. John Matthews, his name was, and he was taking slaves from West Africa to the West Indies. And he had an amazing encounter one day while he was out at sea, and he had a vision of a ghostly figure of a man who was in the chart room where the maps were in a boat and pointing to a certain latitude and longitude. Now, this really intrigued John Matthews, and he felt, I've just got to go there. Something just pushed him into going there. So he actually went to that latitude and longitude, and he saw a man drifting on a raft there, and it was the same person that he had seen in the vision.
Oh, wow.
So, of course, he rescued him. But, I mean, what an amazing thing to happen.
Yeah.
Obviously, this man was a Christian, and he'd been clinging to that raft and praying that someone would save him, and the chances of that were extremely low, as you might imagine.
Mm-hmm.
However, God used John Matthews to go there and save him. And in conversations with this man he rescued, John Matthews was challenged to become a Christian, and he threw his rum overboard, and he decided he was never going to be a slave trader again. Obviously, he paid for that, but that meant then that Daniel grew up in a family where they had regular prayers around the dinner table and talked about their faith.
Mm-hmm. And then Daniel, the son.
And then Daniel migrated to Australia.
And became married to Janet.
And her father was a missionary also.
Oh, okay. So missionary heritage. And we should say that William Cooper was born in 1860 and died in 1941. So just so the listeners kind of have an idea of the time when he lived. So this is going all the way back to the 1800s, the start of this story. Yeah. So let's pick up the story. William Cooper, a young William Cooper, is at the mission that is run by Daniel and Janet Matthews, and he's learning about Christianity. He becomes a Christian there. And one of the things that he learns from his Christian faith is that every single person is created in God's image and has value. And that seems to be a theme that has really had a big impact on William Cooper's life, would you say?
Oh, it had a huge impact on his life. And what he was seeing around him was that many Aboriginal people were dying through introduced diseases, through being put on reserves where they were living in poverty, and there was inadequate hygiene, and he was very distressed by that. And so he knew from his Bible teaching that all men and women are equal in the sight of God, and he was really campaigning for his people to be lifted out of that situation where they were dying and in poverty. And he really wanted them to have better conditions and a voice to Parliament, which was something he campaigned for as well.
Our guest today is author Barbara Miller, who's sharing with us about the life of a very important historical figure in Australia, William Cooper. As we just heard, Cooper championed the rights of Indigenous people, but we'll also hear how he fought for the rights of people outside of Australia and now has a plaque in his honor in Israel. We'll hear about that and more as we hear more of William Cooper's story when we return right here on Real Faith.
The Word for Today is Australia's most widely read daily devotional, designed to give you practical teaching to keep you focused on your relationship with Jesus. Read it online or subscribe to the free printed edition at thewordfortoday.com.au.
You're listening to Real Faith, conversations with real people about how God works in their lives. If you want to know more about integrating faith into your life, our website is realfaith.org.au. Just go to the website and you'll find helpful articles about the impact faith can have on your life. Once again, that's realfaith.org.au.
Welcome back. I'm Eric Scadabo, and today, once again, I'm chatting with Barbara Miller, who's sharing with us about the remarkable life of William Cooper, who Barbara has written 3 books on. Cooper was an Aboriginal Christian Australian who lived from 1860 to 1941, and he championed the rights of Indigenous people his entire life. Now here's more of Barbara sharing about Cooper's life and the many ways he's impacted Australia.
Basically, he wanted to draw people's attention to the plight of Aboriginal people, and so he talked the National Missionary Council into instituting Aboriginal Sunday, which would be a Sunday near Australia Day every year. And this developed over about 15 years. It developed into being celebrated in July, and eventually became a secular event, and eventually became a week-long event that we celebrate today. We know it as NAIDOC. So National Aboriginal and Islander Day Observance Committee. So it's a time of celebration for First Nations people in Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, to come together and really celebrate their heritage. Many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are Christians, not all certainly, but often that is a factor as well.
Okay, so that was just one of the many ways that he fought for the advancement of Aboriginal people, or as now the term is First Nations people. Let's go back to William Cooper and his fight for the advancement of First Nations people in Australia. What else did he do?
Well, I think it's important to note that he founded the first national Aboriginal organisation in Australia, the Australian Aborigines League, in 1933. And that was an amazing thing to do, really. And look, he's really the father of so many of the whole area of Aboriginal advancement in Australia. So that particular organisation amazingly still exists today under a slightly different name. And the people who started with William Cooper, who worked in that national organisation, the Australian Aborigines League, they were all Yorta Yorta people, and they were all Christians.
Oh, okay.
They came from the Murray River area. They came from either Maloga or Cumragunja, which was the state government reserve that came after Maloga. And so they all had that Christian heritage. There were two white people that were working with them, Arthur Burdeau and Helen Bailey. But primarily it was the Yorta Yorta Aboriginal people, a very strong group, I might add, and they were the stalwarts of that organisation.
Okay, and also interesting little bit of history that William Cooper petitioned King George in the 1930s. Tell us about that.
Yes, he did. And so basically for him to get a petition like that with over 1,800 signatures to go to King George was an amazing feat, because at that particular time, of course, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have TV. So basically he had to do a lot of letter writing, and also he had people like Arthur and Helen who would drive him around. And so he travelled amazingly, because he was in his 70s in this period of activism after he moved to Melbourne and set up the League. And so amazing that he was able to get all of those signatures. And basically the petition was asking for better conditions and also representation in Parliament. And the federal government, Prime Minister Lyons, would not send it to the King because he said that Aboriginal people were not citizens of Australia. And so that was something that was very hurtful at the time. And so one of the things that happened is that the 1967 referendum campaign developed out of that. Although William Cooper passed away in 1941, he mentored his nephew, Pastor Sir Doug Nicholls, who eventually became the Governor of South Australia. And he and some of the others from the League who lived on worked together for the 1967 referendum that basically enabled Aboriginal people to be counted in the census and have the federal government make laws for them. Citizenship actually and voting rights came in the 60s before the referendum, but it was still a long way in the future.
Wow. So William Cooper was the forerunner to all these events that you just mentioned.
Absolutely. Yes.
Wow. Quite a heritage. And then also, as we heard in the introduction, William Cooper had a heart outside of Australia. He wanted to help the Jews in Germany. Please tell us about that.
Yes. And so obviously he was a newspaper reader. And so he saw the stories of Kristallnacht.
Yeah, what is Kristallnacht?
Yes, okay. So it's the 9th to the 10th of November in 1938. Basically, it was a pogrom or riot of violence towards Jewish people in Germany, Austria, and Sudetenland, which was part of Czechoslovakia. And it was inaugurated by the Nazis. So basically at Kristallnacht you had about 1,600 synagogues that were burnt or the glass shattered. So that's Kristallnacht means crystal night from the glass shattering.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Also, at least 91 Jews were killed, but others were killed after. 30,000 Jews were sent to concentration camps, the first lot to actually be sent.
So this is, in a sense, the beginning of the Holocaust.
It was the start of the Holocaust, and Jewish homes, old people's homes and hospitals were also destroyed at that time. So it was a huge onslaught on the Jewish people.
So here, William Cooper is in Australia fighting for Aboriginal rights, but yet he reads about this and has a heart for them as well.
Yes, so he was waiting for more world reaction, which didn't seem to be happening very much. I mean, there was some reaction, but not sufficient. And so he basically had a meeting of the League and they passed a motion against the treatment of Jews, and he organised a protest march from his home in Fitzroy to the German consulate in the Melbourne CBD. The protest letter was not accepted, but there was a tiny bit in the Melbourne Argus newspaper about it, which was how it was found out about many years later. So the event was lost to history in many ways and discovered decades later.
And you discovered it. How did that impact you?
It wasn't me that discovered it.
Well, you eventually learned about it.
Yes, I learnt about it, and when I saw something in the Jewish newspaper about the event at the Holocaust Museum in Melbourne, where they were honouring William Cooper, and since then there's been a huge number of instances of honouring of William Cooper in Australia, plus also at Yad Vashem in Israel, where Norman and I were privileged to attend. And there were 17 parliamentarians from Australia from a bipartisan group headed by Kevin Rudd, who was Foreign Minister at the time. And basically William Cooper was honoured there with the Chair of Resistance to the Holocaust named after him.
Wow.
And it was at that same occasion that Kevin Rudd apologised on behalf of Australia for Australia's position at Evian. So those two things came together. We had been campaigning for that Evian apology from the Australian government for about 10 years. So two really important events converged.
Yeah, so William Cooper is honoured in Israel. That's remarkable.
Oh, yes. Well, of course, Yad Vashem does honour the righteous amongst the Gentiles. He was not able to qualify for that, of course, because he didn't personally save Jewish lives. However, because there were so few protests, private protests worldwide against Kristallnacht, it was remarkable, particularly when Aboriginal people were not citizens in their own land. And so they had planted trees for him in Jerusalem, and also at Yatir Forest there's trees planted to him, along with trees planted for other people who stood up to protect Jews during the Holocaust.
Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time, but you marked the anniversary of that protest in a special way. Can you please tell us about that?
Yes. So when I wrote the book on him in 2012, I felt it would be really good to have a reenactment of that protest walk or march. And so I got onto the German consul in Melbourne and asked him if he would receive a replica of William Cooper's petition, basically from his grandson, Uncle Bordy or Alf Turner. He said yes. He got clearance from the embassy in Canberra, and we had this awesome reenactment with Jews, Aborigines, Christians, etc. And when we got there, the German consul surprised us by actually apologising. So it was a very moving moment for Holocaust survivors and children of survivors who are with us. There was many, many tears, and it was a very healing and moving moment. So, yes, it was just awesome to have been involved in helping to bring that to pass.
Wow.
For Norman and I, we don't just do something because it's a good idea. We do something because the Lord is leading us that way. So although our ministry is one of reconciliation, we don't go around saying sorry and apologising for this and that and everything. It's only when the Lord puts it on our heart and we stay faithful to his call on our life. And so when he does lead us to say sorry or apologise for hurts of history, which we believe we're called to heal, then there's a remarkable result that healing actually occurs because the Lord is behind it. And so that's where our faith comes in.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much once again, Barbara Miller, for sharing not only your own story, but the wonderful legacy of William Cooper. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Eric. Pleasure talking to you, and God bless you.
Well, that was part 2 of my conversation with Barbara Miller, who is sharing with us about the remarkable life of William Cooper. Barbara has written 3 books on William Cooper, including one entitled White Australia Has a Black History, and another regarding the protests Cooper led against the Holocaust that we just heard about. To learn more about all of Barbara's books, you can go to her website. It's barbara-miller-books.com. Once again, that's barbara-miller-books.com. Finally, it was great to hear about the influence missionaries had on Cooper's young life. In addition to teaching him to read and write, they taught him the Bible and that all men were created equal. They also taught him about the Hebrews' exodus from slavery in Egypt and that he should stand up for his people's rights. William Cooper's strong Christian faith had a huge impact on guiding his life and is an inspiring story for all of us. Well, thank you so much for joining us for William Cooper's story as told to us by Barbara Miller. And until next time, I'm Eric Scadabo. So long, and God bless.
You've been listening to Real Faith, and if you have any questions or comments, you can send us a message through our website, realfaith.org.au. That's realfaith.org.au.
Real Faith is a production of Vision Christian Media.
This program is a production of Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, see vision.org.au.